This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning, and we take a look at political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 8th of July, 2020, and I am DM.
I'm Tom.
And I am JM. Here are the headlines. The lost year. That's from the Daily Nation. In the Standard, mass school repetitions. And in the Star, DP RUTO missing as Uhuru rallies cabinet. So we'll take the Daily Nation and the Standard together. These are about the lost year, about the children who have now joined the list of the major casualties of the COVID-19 pandemic, following the government suspension of the school calendar yesterday. So about 15 million students are going to be affected by this. However, the government allowed universities and other institutions of higher learning to reopen in September as long as they meet the conditions given by the Ministry of Health. Now, the Education CS George Magoha also cancelled this year's KCPE and KCSE examinations, affecting about 2 million learners. And finally, the Nation observes that this is the first time in Kenyan history that the school calendar has been disrupted in its entirety. The last time the education sector faced such a crisis was after the abortive coup of August 1982, when universities were closed for about 9 months. And that closure created a backlog, we're told, in university education for about 5 years, which compelled the government to have a double intake in 1987. That's the long and short of the lost year.
The Standard also says that Magoha took this decision, or his explanation was that he anticipates that the curve would have been flattened by December, and therefore allowing the children and the students to go back to school in January.
But what if it's not?
That's the thing, is what if it's not? Will we do this in perpetuity? I think we only hope that this is a plan A. It only gives more time for preparedness and for preparation in the education system, so that if the does not flattened by December, then there would be another plan. Otherwise, people will be joining Form 1 at 25 years old.
I tell you.
We'll keep waiting.
Waiting, We're only going to be postponing a problem. So I quite like that headline of the Daily Nation.
The lost year.
The lost year.
Yes, and then standard mass school repetitions. I think we can toss that one.
But
by the way, too, what's your opinion on this? Do you think your kids should go back to school, or?
Let me tell you what I was thinking. You know, on a light note, the good performers and the bad performers, the guys who would normally repeat class, are in the same WhatsApp group now.
They're all It's always been such a culturally bad thing to say you were held back a year, you repeated. But you know, honestly, I really think that 1 year is not a big deal. It looks like a big deal when you're much younger, but when you're older, it's
absolutely.
It's not a big deal.
So we have a 3-part criteria that we use to assess the headlines. Are they topical or speculative, repetitive or groundbreaking, and finally thoughtful or just plain lazy? As I mentioned before, I think that Daily Nation is a strong contender. I think we put that in the bag.
Absolutely.
Standard mass school repetitions.
I think we've covered it, haven't we, Jem?
Toss that. That's what I mean.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, and in the Star, what do we have?
DP RUTO missing as Uhuru rallies cabinet. Now, yesterday, President Uhuru Kenyatta held a meeting with the members of his cabinet, CSs, PSs, and CASs. And the person in charge of the National Development Implementation Communication Cabinet Committee, that's a mouthful. Dr. Fred Matiang'i, and Karanja Kibisho got accolades from President Uhuru Kenyatta. Here's what he said. He said, in a dispatch to the media, the president said the Matiang'i team and another chaired by Interior PS Karanja Kibisho had proved their effectiveness in overseeing government development programs. Now, conspicuously missing from this cabinet meeting was Deputy President William Ruto, and now he doesn't have an excuse saying that he doesn't have to be physically there. This was actually a virtual meeting, and you see, it is very clear that he has been sidelined. But again, Auzola and Alolo say, and maybe make some people mad, he has himself to blame. You see, in the Constitution, the Deputy President is the principal assistant to the President. He doesn't have any designated functions until such a time the President designates functions to him. And what am I saying here? You see, I think he is, and he should have seen himself as a decoration of the presidency. Now he goes around with the president, and that's the reason I'm saying this, because it's a big departure from pre-2017. Because any small meeting, any small thing that the president went to do, he went to the deputy president. Any meeting he had with donors, the partners, finance partners, he went to the deputy president. But now he is nowhere to be seen, and that's because he has aggressed the president.
Absolutely.
If you're not going to listen, if you're going to go against his wishes, then this is what will befall you.
Yeah. If you are attempting to succeed the president while he's still in office, that's totally out of order. These are the consequences.
Yeah, but I might also add that the deputy president was meeting church people, as he normally would do, like on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So at least he was busy.
Guys, you must remember that William Ruto is an experimental deputy. In fact, he's the first deputy president that we've ever had.
Yeah.
We've only had vice presidents before in different constitutions. So, no other vice president has ever been told that you're going to be the next one. How do you behave before an election if you're told that you're going to be the next president, number one?
Previous VPs were, it wasn't explicitly told to them, but there was the expectation.
But they knew their place. They knew their place, and they did not enter into what we used to call the presidency in the same way that the deputy president did with the president. We all agree. So unfortunately, the deputy president then serves as a guinea pig.
To some extent, I agree, DM. And you know why?
So you need to cut him some slack.
Because all VPs, even during Moi's time, Kenyatta's time, could be fired by the president. Even Mwai Kibaki, if he really wanted to fire his VP, he would have fired him. I don't think there's a point where he fired his DP. What's my point here? The Constitution says that you cannot fire, the DP cannot be fired. He can only be impeached, or if he wants to resign, he can resign.
So all that the president is left to do is passive aggression.
No, point here is the DP thought that thing in the Constitution gave him a lot of power. That because he cannot be fired, he can remain there and cause some trouble, and the boss will not do anything to him. Well, these are the repercussions of going against the boss, or maybe what I would call gross insubordination.
No, these are the repercussions of a faulty constitution.
Okay, we can blame it on the constitution,
Ruto,
which needs changing.
DP Ruto, please blame it on the constitution.
Yes, let's.
Okay, who shall we give the winning headline?
The Daily Nation, I think, is imaginative.
Fantastic.
It is topical. It is interesting. It's all those things.
And on to the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. We use a three-part criteria to assess these. Are they humorous or dry, satirical or pessimistic, and effective or just plain lazy? Let me begin with the Daily Nation.
Yes.
The year that never was. This is a caricature of C.S. Magoha looking over a student who is erasing content on a blank ruled foolscap. And the student has a large pencil, as you can see, where the eraser is awkwardly much larger than the lead and the nib itself that he's using there. And that's just to signify really just a lost year that this is. 2020, total write-off.
Yeah.
I think that's a bogus cartoon, man.
But yeah, lacking in imagination.
But it's interesting how the eraser is so much longer than the
nibble
than the pencils. You know, the truth is, guys, that the children learn all the time, and structured education is just one part of their general education. But the truth is that it's the poorer children, or children lower down the socioeconomic scale, that are going to bear the brunt of it. I mean, children in public schools will continue with, even if the government has said that schools will not reopen, it's likely because they have access to the internet, they'll continue with the structured learning. And then, of course, poorer kids are more vulnerable at this time. They face the danger of neglect. But as I said before, it's not, a year is not a catastrophe.
Not.
We will get back to where we're supposed to be.
Having said that, I think we can toss
to
the Daily Nation and on to the Standard.
Very far.
In the Standard, we have Gado with a caricature of holding a smoking gun in a hospital, and on the bed is DJ Evolve, who he shot
allegedly
a couple of months ago. It's not alleged. We saw the video. He shot him. And he looks very afraid. He's lying on the bed very afraid. And because he's being intimidated and threatened by Babu Owino, who is saying, what is he saying? If you don't apologize to me, I'll withdraw my support for your medical, then sue you. And it is worth noting also that Babu Owino is wearing dirty diapers. I think Gado is making an indication.
He's a child.
He's just pointing out to his very infantile nature. I agree with you, Gado, today.
Let's put that in the parking bay. What do we have in the Star?
Oh, the Star is another boring cartoon. That is C.S. George Magoha, and he's been caricatured as a padlock. And and I think this is the school year 2020 has been locked. It's
straight away. I could have drawn this myself.
Such a rubbish cartoon.
Total lack of imagination. Toss that one as well.
Yeah.
So you have Gado. I agree.
Gado's is brilliant.
I agree.
And he has put the truth in plain sight.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And so there we have it. We have our winning headline from the Daily Nation and our winning cartoon from the Standard. And now, on to our final thought segment. But before we get to it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. So, what is our final thought?
And now, our final thought. It is inspired by a book entitled Against Elections, The Case for Democracy by David van de Rebroek.
Yes. And this week we've been dedicating books to our political players, including every Kenyan. We are all political players. And today's book is dedicated to none other than the former Prime Minister, Raila Odinga.
Yes.
And who better to dedicate a book about elections to than Baba Man? So this book, from the title, it's very contradictory. He's saying against elections, and then he's making a case for democracy. And for most people, for a lot of people, democracy and elections are so closely tied together. In fact, you can argue that there is not one without the other.
Yeah.
But the author says that it is actually the futility of elections that has caused a lot of people to lose faith in the process of democracy or in democratic processes. And he says that we're living in a very, very dangerous time. Because there's a very high interest in politics, and I agree. Social media has created a platform where a lot of people can engage, can express their opinions, can consume the opinions of others, and can even agitate for change and cause political change. But even though we are living in a time of such high political engagement, there is very low faith or belief in democracy. And to paraphrase a quote in the book, he says, democratic fatigue syndrome is a disorder from which many countries are suffering. So he's saying we are sick of democracy or from democracy. And he uses this metaphor of illness in the book. In fact, he has divided the 3 chapters into 3. The first one is diagnosis, of course, about detecting what the problem is or what the illness is. And then the second part is pathogenesis, studying or interrogating how this disease is developing. And finally, of course, the remedy, which where he's preferring a treatment or a solution.
Yes.
Jem, what is the diagnosis?
So just before we get to the diagnosis, if you've just joined us, dear viewer, we've been putting democracy on trial this week. And so that's what this book is really about in a lot of ways. And here he talks about the democratic fatigue syndrome, which you've just mentioned, DM. And here what he's saying is that that citizens, for one reason or another, and he actually mentions 3 reasons why citizens experience the democratic fatigue syndrome. One, it's the fault of the politicians, he says. 2, it's the fault of democracy itself, the way democracy is structured and is wired. And 3, the fault of representative democracy, which is really the direct democracy that we experience.
Yes.
And I'll just deal with the fault of the politicians. And before we begin, I just want to recall the Nairobi Metropolitan Services has just finished doing its 100 days, in which it's accomplished a lot of things which have been trying to be done for the last maybe even 20, 30 years. And there's one testimony here that really struck me from a leader in Kirinyaga. Kirinyaga Road, rather. And this is what he says. And he posted some photographs, and we'll put that up on your screen, of the road construction currently happening in the last 2 months. Oh, yeah. And he says, this is Kirinyaga Road within 2 months without politicians. Yeah. Now, I've come to realize politicians are our biggest problem. As a leader in Kirinyaga Road, we have begged for this road to even get drainage, and nobody bothered to listen to us. I am proud of my government, is what he has to say. Yes. And that's precisely the point. So this is a person who has experienced democratic fatigue, the flaws of democracy. And so the author goes on to discuss 2 types of politicians: the democratic elite, who are the aloof, money-grabbing, profiteering parasites, he calls them, who are totally out of touch with the common man. And that is what the former Nairobi governor is accused of by some of Nairobi's residents. And then the second lot are called the democratic populists. These promote themselves as direct representatives of the people. They say that they're the voice of the underbelly, that they say that they're also accessible. They're men of drastic action, immediate action. And this is how the current Nairobi governor has styled himself. So these 2 kind of characters will often go against each other during election season. But the truth is, the author tells us, they're different sides of the same coin. So at the end of the day, they're both prisoners in a political system that we call democracy, which compels them to have a lot of compromise, to not execute their agenda 100%.
Even if the intention existed.
Even if the intention existed. You get in there under democratic conditions, and you are actually a prisoner, which is why I have constantly made the case for something we call bureaucratic authoritarianism. Oh yes. Which is actually the experiment currently underway in Nairobi County, where you have a military man at the top who runs the politics, who minimizes politics to almost 0 levels, so that work can get done. And so he's created a conducive environment for engineers, for all sorts of professionals to actually get the job done in terms of building the country. And I think that is a good model that we can scale up. Not only in Nairobi, but also across all our county governments, and maybe even in the country. Who knows, one day.
Nice. That sounded more like a sermon than a diagnosis.
I love it. Diagnosis. So politicians, basically what he's saying here is, politicians are going to be politicians. They're both the kind of same people. Even if they promise you change, they're always going to let you down, period.
Absolutely. And I could not agree more. And I was doing the chapter on pathogenesis, and the last part of this chapter, he calls it the democratization of elections, a bogus process. Now, if you're reading this chapter and you are a believer of elections, then you are a believer in convoluted elective systems. And let me explain why. You see, he says that in as early as 1851, there's a man who was called Alexis de Tocqueville. I'm not sure I pronounce Tocqueville. Right. Now this man wrote a book called Democracy in America, and he noted that elective aristocracy, of which Rousseau spoke 50 years ago, is what we now call representative democracy. So I went back and I checked what is this elective aristocracy, and which Rousseau has spoken about many times, and Rousseau actually considers elective aristocracy as the best kind of democracy. And the reason he does that is because he says it is where those with power or riches, or those who are best suited to govern, are placed in charge. And the transition from that to elective democracy is just a small switch, where that person in charge with all the power and the riches now actually puts in a proxy to take care of government, or take care of democracy matters. And there's something he says to back this up. He says, electoral fundamentalists, we have for decades clung to the ballot box as if it were the holy grail of democracy, only to discover that we have been clinging not to a holy grail, but to a poison chalice that was deliberately set up as an anti-democratic instrument. How can it be that we failed for so long to see this? And you see, there's a reason why this book today is fit for Baba. Baba saw it, Baba and President Uhuru Kenyatta saw it in 2017 when they did the handshake. Look, my point is this: for how long will we do democratic, direct presidential elections?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if this democracy of ours, which has not happened, which has not worked for Africa, it is because we have been using templates of other people. Right now, for long I have been saying, why can't we use hybrid systems and even include tribes? Why can't all the tribes go and vote for their own chief leaders and then come together and have one of them leaders for for time immemorial? The point
we'll
is,
have 50 presidents at the same time.
Actually, my model, if you guys allow me, is to have a hybrid model where we have about all the tribes coming together. If you don't vote for your tribe, you can go and seek for a neutral vote. There'll be a neutral vote. So you have about 45 votes. Then everybody goes and stands up behind the leader that they want of their tribe. And then these guys meet up in a council and choose one of them to have a 7-year presidential term. Now, that way, we stop thinking like tribal kingpins. But at the same time, we have also involved the tribe into elected politics. The problem we have right now is because we're using other people's templates to dictate our democracy. But that's another point. But I think for us to get to our own systems, we must now start thinking of, instead of direct democracy, we must start thinking of indirect democracies. And maybe that's why BBI is a good idea.
Yeah, and the parliamentary system.
Yeah.
So just like you, 2M, the author of this book is offering a solution or a remedy that is not electoral or the kind of electoral processes that we have now in democratic systems.
Yeah.
And he says at the very beginning, even from the title, that he's against elections.
Yeah.
And so the solution that he is offering is the revival of an old democratic practice called sortition.
Yeah.
And this was a system that operated in ancient democracies like Florence and Venice and other places.
Yeah.
So what happened is that a small number of people from the public were randomly selected through a lottery.
Yeah.
And then this small group of people were called to undertake a study of different issues or subjects that they will legislate or debate about. And these are issues of governance. So when they acquired a deep understanding, then they would govern for a while until another lottery process happens.
Yeah.
And so it dealt with a number of things. The first one is that the people who were selected usually ended up being very demographically representative. So you would have women, you would have people of different ages, you would also have representation from groups that were either an ethnic minority or marginalized. Then the other thing is that it greatly reduced election fever because you are, the process is about governance, not about governors or people who are going to rule over the population. And then the thing that he says was an outcome of this process is that the focus shifted to common good.
Yes.
So what it is that they debated about and agreements that they came to more often than not were about the common good than about material gain or personal empowerment. He also points out that sortition is already in place, or a kind of selective sortition. For instance, in the judicial systems where they use jury, where a jury is part of the deciding process for a case, where 12 random people from the public come in to make into a case process in a court to make an informed decision that will then contribute to the sentencing or the release of the accused, even in heinous crimes such as murder. But of course there's problems with this kind of system, like a jury system, because depending on the complexity of the matter, if people are coming in, for instance, to decide on a complex financial fraud, it is quite likely that the decisions that they would make are not as informed as if a tax lawyer or whoever was predominantly engaged. I don't know if I agree with him 100%, but I think democracy perhaps calls for a reimagination, and specifically elections. Perhaps we could have sortation first, where we are narrowing down and increasing the threshold of people that should stand up for elections.
Fantastic.
Maybe.
Fantastic.
I don't know. Sortation before election.
Yes.
Interesting perspectives. So on a day where we had a winning headline from The Nation and a winning cartoon from The Standard, I will leave you with a prophetic quote by Robert Hutchins, a 20th century American educational philosopher and chancellor of the University of Chicago. He said, "The death of democracy is not likely to be an assassination from ambush. It will be a slow extinction from apathy, indifference, and undernourishment." Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And during these COVID times, please remember, this COVID-19 virus does not come to you. You go to it. So please keep safe. Don't go looking for the virus. Stay at home, minimize movements, and so on and so forth. Have a good evening.